Trucks and hauling freight, red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew, all with different roles to play. Round Christmas sheds so far away, down the hills and round the bends, Thomas and his friends.
Near the line on Thomas's branch line stands an old cottage where the Kyndley couple live. The couple have had many adventures with the engines on the North Western Railway, but now they've grown old and retired. They still say hello whenever an engine would whistle or ring his bell, waving a hand out of the window as they went past. But one night a blizzard had hit the Island of Sodor. The citizens were prepared to go home, but transportation from the North Western Railway and Bertie the bus had been delayed by the terrible conditions. But at the Kyndley Cottage things weren't so well. At Knapford Station, the Fat Controller was preparing to leave for home when the phone rang.
Meow.
Hello?
Oh, Sir Topper Hat, thank God it's you.
Mr. Kyndley, what's the matter?
It's Mrs. Kyndley, I think she's had a heart attack. I tried phoning the hospital, but all the roads are blocked. We need help immediately.
Of course, don't worry, Mr. Kyndley, we'll be there as soon as possible. He put down the phone and started arrangements at once. Thomas arrived in Knapford Station with Annie and Clarabel with the paramedics. The Fat Controller was there, waiting.
Oh, there you are, Thomas. Now we must get going, and fast.
Do you think she'll be okay, sir?
I honestly don't know, Thomas, but for now it's all steam ahead.
The Fat Controller climbed aboard, and they left Knapford Station. The blizzard was getting worse, and Thomas was finding it hard to puff down the line fast enough even with his snowplow.
We're not going to make it in time. We're not going to make it in time.
I can and I will. I can and I will,
said Thomas with determination. When they finally arrived, they found Mr. Kyndley standing outside of the door. The paramedics and the Fat Controller climbed out and went into the old cottage. Thomas just hoped that Mrs. Kyndley was okay, but when the Fat Controller came back, he had something to say to Thomas.
Thomas, I don't know how to put this, but...
No, sir, you don't mean... And then coming out of the house were the paramedics carrying Mrs. Kyndley to Annie and Clarabel. Mr. Kyndley was crying.
Yes, Mrs. Kyndley is dead.
Thomas in shock was heartbroken, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt depressed. Once they were all aboard, Thomas puffed sadly away. And the old cottage stood sad and silent next to the tunnel. When Thomas got back to Timber Sheds, the other engines still awake. Rory saw the sad expression on his face.
Is she alright?
Said Percy, but Thomas couldn't reply until at last the sad blue engine burst into tears.
No, I'm afraid she's not, Percy. She's dead.
All the engines gasped in horror, then their faces fell.
I don't know what to say. I do.
The engines turned to the old tram engine.
Well, considering it's almost Christmas, don't you remember our first Christmas with Mrs. Kyndley?
And this is the story Toby told. The year was 1952, it was nearly Christmas. Thomas was putting Annie and Clarabel, who were full of people and parcels. He was at hard work.
Come on, come on!
Thomas puffed to his coaches.
We're so full. We're so full.
Grumbled his faithful coaches. Thomas looked at the hill ahead.
Can I do it? Can I do it?
He said anxiously. Suddenly he saw a handkerchief waving from a cottage window. He felt better at once.
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. He puffed bravely. He pulled his hardest and was soon through the tunnel and resting at the station. That was Mrs. Kyndley who waved to you, Thomas, his driver told him. She has to stay in bed all day.
Poor lady, I am sorry for her, he replied. 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 The engines have heavy loads at Christmas time, but Thomas and Toby didn't mind the hard work when they saw Mrs. Kyndley waving. But then it began to rain. It rained for days and days. Thomas didn't like the weather, nor did his driver.
Off we go, Thomas,
He would say,
pull hard to get home quickly. Mrs. Kyndley won't wave today.
but whether she waved or not, they always whistled when they passed the little lonely cottage. Its white walls stood out against the dark background of the hills.
Hello,
Exclaimed Thomas's fireman.
look at that.
The driver leaned across the cab.
Something's wrong there.
He said, hanging, flapping and beraggled from the window of the cottage was something that looked like a large red flag.
Mrs. Kyndley needs help, I expect,
said the driver, who put on the brakes. Thomas gently stopped. The guards came squelching through the rain to Thomas's cab, and the driver pointed to the flag.
See if there's a doctor on the train and ask him to go to the cottage. They'll walk back to the station and tell them we've stopped.
The fireman went to see if the line was clear in front. 2 passengers left the train and climbed to the cottage. Then the fireman returned.
We'll go back down to the station,
Said the driver.
so that Thomas can get a good start. We shan't get up the hill.
The fireman answered.
Come and see what's happened.
They walked along the line, round the bend.
Jiminy Christmas! Exclaimed the driver. Go back to the train. I'm going to the cottage.
He found the doctor and Mrs. Kyndley.
How silly of me to faint.
She said.
You saw the red dress and gown? You're all safe?
Asked Mrs. Kyndley.
Yes.
Smiled the driver.
I've come to thank you. There was a landslide in the cutting, Doctor, and Mrs. Kyndley saw it from a window and stopped us. She saved our lives. God bless you, ma'am.
He finished and tiptoed back to the train. They cleared the line by Christmas Day and the sun shone as a special train puffed up from the junction.
First came Toby, then Thomas, Annie and Clarabel, and last of all Henrietta. The fat controller was there. He and lots of other people wanted to say thank you to Mrs. Kyndley.
Beep, beep!
Happy Christmas! Whistled the engines as they reached the cottage. The people got out and climbed up to the cottage. Thomas and Toby wished they could go too. Mrs. Kyndley's husband met them at the door. The fat controller, Thomas's driver, fireman and guard went upstairs, while the others stood in the sunshine below the window. The driver gave her a new dressing gown to replace one spoilt by the rain. The guard brought her some grapes, and the fireman gave her some woolly slippers and promised to bring some coal as a present from Thomas next time they passed. Mrs. Kyndley was pleased with her gifts.
Oh, you are very kind to me.
She said,
The passengers and I
said the fat controller.
hope you will accept these tickets for the South Coast, Mrs. Kyndley, and get really well in the sunshine. We cannot thank you enough for preventing what could have been a catastrophe. I hope we have not tired you. Goodbye and Happy Christmas.
Then quietly going downstairs. They joined the group outside the window and sang some carols. Thomas and Toby happily joined in. All the angels felt a little cheered up. Reminiscing about the past had helped, but no matter how much they tried, they still felt lost. That was good and all, but I still feel upset about Mrs. Kyndley. Is she truly gone, Thomas? I'm afraid so, Percy. Percy frowned. He felt like he was going to cry. Don't worry, it's fine to be upset. It shows how important she was to us. But I think we should share the memories we shared with her in memory. All the engines agreed, and that night as it snowed, all the engines shared their most fondest memories of Mrs. Kyndley.